Welcome to a new episode from Perfect English Podcast. Today we're going to focus on vocabulary and we're going to learn words we can use to talk about romance, marriage, and divorce. Now we will read the story of Darren, who is going to tell us about his own story of romance, marriage, and divorce, and we're going to learn keywords while we are listening to his story. So let's start with romance. I had my first date when I was 16, and it was terrible. I took a girl to the cinema, but she didn't like the film and looked bored all evening. It was a bad start. Then when I was 17, I went out with a girl for 3 months, but we broke up when she met a boy who was 2 years older than me and had a car. My first serious relationship was when I went to university. I got to know Melanie because we were on the same course. At first, we were just friends. Then we started going out with each other. And after a few months, we realized we were in love. We got engaged a couple of years after we left university, and then... Now I'm going to cut that here before we move to the marriage part and go back to see the key words he used in his story to talk about the romance part of his relationship. Now we will start with what he said first. He said, I had my first date. Now date can obviously be used to talk about the date of today, like today, June the 3rd. But when you have a date, it is like an appointment, but an appointment is with a doctor or with somebody that you do not have a romantic meeting with. A date is a planned romantic meeting, and you say, you have a date. So for Darren, he had his first date when he was 16. That went terrible. The girl didn't like it. It was not the perfect start he was looking for. But then he had a chance another time when he was 17. He said, I went out with a girl for 3 months. So here it's not just going out with a girl for one time. You can go out with somebody for a period of time. And when you say that, you mean that you have a romantic relationship with this person. So when you say, I go out with a person for a year, a month, it doesn't matter how long, that means you have a romantic relationship with that person. But unfortunately, he said, we broke up. They broke up, that means the relationship ended. Then he said, my first serious relationship. So, the first two relationships he talked about were not that serious. The first one was not even a relationship. Maybe it just lasted that time they went to the movies. The second one lasted longer for about 3 months, but that was not actually serious. His first serious relationship, and when we say serious relationship, we're talking about important romantic relationship. And that was at university. He said, I got to know Melanie because we were in the same course. Now, when you say, I got to know somebody, you mean that you become friends with that person. So here, he got to know Melanie. They became friends when they were together on the same course. Now, later he said, we realized we were in love. Of course, this is very obvious and everybody knows the meaning of in love, but just remember the preposition you use here. You say, I'm in love with somebody. And Darren was in love with Melanie. They both realized they were in love. Then he said, we got engaged a couple of years after we left university. So when you say you get engaged to somebody, you mean that you formally agreed to marry that person. You usually propose, that person agrees, and then you formally agree to marry. So he got engaged a couple of years after they left university. Just a quick note about a couple of years. A couple of years might seem to you that it's exactly 2 years because it's a couple, but it's not exactly 2 years. Sometimes it's 2 or perhaps 3. So it is an approximate number. We say, I'll meet you in a couple of hours. A couple of hours is not exactly 2 hours, 120 minutes. It is not an exact period of time. It is an approximate. It's usually 2, that's true, but sometimes it is 3. So he said we got engaged a couple of years. They were engaged for 2 or 3 years. So that was the romance part of Darren's story. Now we will move to the marriage part of his story. We got married the following year. We didn't want a big ceremony, so we had the wedding in the local church near Melanie's home with just family and a few friends. Afterwards, we had the reception in a small hotel nearby and then went on our honeymoon to Greece. So I'll stop here again before I move to the children part and hear the marriage part of Darren's story. He said we got married. Now obviously you understand what married means, but look at the expression we use. We say we got married. We became husband and wife officially. But we say we got married. We don't say we married. When you want to mean we became husband and wife, you have to use get married. So the first word we focused on here is got married or get married, obviously. Then he said we didn't want a big ceremony. Now the ceremony is an important public event for any occasion. It is not always related to marriages. Ceremonies could happen for any other reason, but it is important and it is public and it is usually big, as he said. So they didn't want a big ceremony. They had the wedding in the local church. Now the wedding is the ceremony when people get married. And this is the official ceremony. Now it depends on the traditions or the religion. It could happen in different places. In their case, it happened in the local church. This ceremony when people get married, the wedding. And then he said, afterwards we had the reception in a small hotel nearby. Now the reception is simply the wedding party. And then he said, we went on our honeymoon to Greece. Obviously, the word to focus on here is honeymoon. And that is a holiday just after getting married. Now, before we move on, I just want to focus on a couple of things. And these are common mistakes people make when they use some of the words we learned here. We said she got to know Darren at university. That means they became friends. People sometimes make the mistake by dropping got and using only the verb know. So they say, for example, she knew Darren at university. Well, she knew Darren at university is different from she got to know Darren at university. She got to know Darren at university. That means they were friends. If you just say she knew Darren at university, it's just like you know the person. Maybe she's never talked to that person. Maybe she just knew that that person was Darren, that's all. And it is not usually used. So we use get to know in this situation, not know. Now the other thing I want to talk about is get married. Usually people make the mistake of using the wrong preposition with get married. They say she's getting married with Darren next year. Well, it might seem logical because with can mean that two people together, but this is not the preposition we use with get married. We say she's getting married to Darren next year. And it works as well with getting engaged. We say getting engaged to somebody, not with somebody. And now let's move to the third part of our story, and that is the children part. Just over 3 years later, Melanie got pregnant. And our first child, Cal, was born just 2 days after our 4th wedding anniversary. We had a big celebration. Now, obviously we know getting pregnant is to be with child, and we have another word that is the wedding anniversary. Now, the anniversary, or especially the wedding anniversary, is the day that is exactly 1 or more years after an important event. In this case, it is the same day they got married, and that was their 4th, so they got married 4 years earlier. And the last word I want to focus on here is the big celebration. Now, the celebration is a time when you do something you enjoy because it's a special day. And the verb to use with that is to have. When you have a special day, maybe because you graduated or you were promoted or something special happened to you, you may have a big celebration. And now we come to the sad part of the story, and that is divorce. Things started to go wrong when I got a job as manager of a sportswear company. I was working 6 days a week and I had to do a lot of traveling. It was difficult for Melanie as well. She was working during the week, then at weekends she was often on her own with 2 young children. I felt I couldn't give up my job, and in the end Melanie decided to leave me. The following year we got divorced. So let's focus on some of the key words we want to learn from the sad part of our story today. Things started to go wrong. and that means become a problem. When things go wrong, that means we have problems. And obviously that happened because Darren was not around a lot. He had to work a lot, he had to travel a lot, and Melanie was often on her own. When we say somebody is on his or her own or alone, that means without other people. And that is very bad, especially for married couples. It might be okay during the week, it might be okay on a temporary basis, but when that happens for a long time, it usually causes problems between married couples because after all, they get together to have a life together. So that was a big part of the problem, that she was often on her own. And notice the expression we say here, on her own. That means without other people. And now for the next key word, I felt I couldn't give up my job. Now, to give up something, in this case, his job, Darren's job, means to stop doing something. Now, maybe it was a solution if he gave up his job, but God knows, maybe if he gave up his job, other problems would arise. We don't know exactly what happened to him, but we know what he decided. He felt he couldn't give up his job. He couldn't stop doing his job. And in the end, Melanie decided to leave me, and to leave me in this context means to stop living with me. So Melanie stopped living with Darren. We can use leave in other situations like it's time for me to leave, and that doesn't mean that I don't want to live with you anymore. It depends on the context, but when you talk about a couple and you say that she left him or he left her, that means they stopped living together. And the last thing is the following year, we got divorced. And when we say we got divorced, that means the marriage officially ended. So that was the story of Darren. The story had good moments and bad moments, but for us, we learned a lot of words we can use to talk about romance, marriage, and divorce. I hope you learned a lot of new things from Darren's story and the words we focused on today. This is your host, Danny, saying thank you very much for listening to another episode from Perfect English Podcast. I will see you tomorrow in a new episode.